which if you want to know a lot of connections to Epstein, the Franklin scandal is a great place to start. Starts with the Bank of Omaha. Ultimately, this is also where we see Johnny Gosch, one of the first ever, it's disappearance for a young boy from Iowa. And he ultimately is going to be one of these individuals who are kind of being crafted in this whole system. Whether it be for trauma or mind control, we don't know. The scarier option that's even more on the fringe is the idea of eating, basically, children. The chemicals that elicit based off this high level of trauma and fear. This is more fringe. I'm not going to say this is real at all, but it's an idea that if you elicit trauma, or at least pain and fear and suffering from a human being, the chemicals that they elicit are essentially a drug to then be consumed, to then feel a certain way. Again, I don't know if that's true or not. I think that's probably fake, but I can see the idea. Now, two more tools that intelligence is going to use during this time, and then honestly forever: terrorist or rebellion funding. Because they're trying to destabilize enemy territories or enemy countries, what we might do is help the people who are trying to destabilize that country. Great example, 1979, we have the Afghan-Soviet War. We just had our own Vietnam, which is a massive failure. We waste a lot of money. So what we want to do, well, we want to create a Vietnam for our enemies that, in this case, is Russia. So Afghanistan is trying to be attacked by Russia. They want to take it. What's going on is there's a small terrorist group known as the Mujahideen, headed by Osama bin Laden, who's eventually not going to be a good character for us. But right now, he's a friend, because he's against the Soviets. So we're going to give them a lot of weapons, a lot of money, and in some cases in Afghanistan, we're going to give them drugs to then grow their own heroin, because I believe at the time they were in charge of like 90% of the world's output of heroin, which is pretty interesting. But that Mujahideen is going to eventually become the Taliban, which is then Al-Qaeda, which is then relatively ISIS. We gave them money and weapons. The last tool, and again, these are just the biggest tools they use. The biggest tool they use is media. We know this because if Operation Paperclip shows that they at least split the Nazis in half, Operation Mockingbird is going to show that there is a deliberate effort, at least in the 60s. Again, this is all in the 60s. This is definitely not any more happening. We can trust them. But Operation Mockingbird is essentially this connection between intelligence and media. We definitely can't see this connection in modern day, especially when former heads of the intelligence agency are talking on CNN or Fox News. They're definitely not trying to manipulate us via media. I'm telling you this, they are not. What are they not trying to do? They are not trying to manipulate us. Wink, wink. Now this is the intelligence apparatus. This is the same intelligence apparatus that may or may not be in charge of certain political moves, especially in Butler, Pennsylvania. If you guys get my drift on that one. So this leads us into at least one of our most notorious presidents, JFK, which he's probably a good guy. He's just a terrible husband. He achieves a back injury in high school from playing football, and he would have to wear this lower back brace, but it wasn't in his adult life why he had to wear it. He didn't have to wear it because of football. It was because he fornicated too often, specifically with people who he was not married to, in turn not his wife Jackie. Unfortunately, that's really just what his father did, Joe Kennedy. That's kind of how their household was ran. So it's a lot like monkey see, monkey do. The behaviors of the father tend to show to the president. Again, one of the greatest things that ever happened to him is him getting shot in the head, because it allows him to become a martyr, meaning he dies for a purpose. He is now going to be a good person, at least historically, although he's not great. Now, what we see from him, and again, I'm not going to point the finger at who killed JFK. More than likely, this entity. More than likely. But what we can also see is during this time, there's also a lot of other politically motivated assassinations via, if it's not this group, it's this group. Because the FBI is headed by a guy named J. Edgar Hoover, who had blackmail on him for about 20 years because he loved to cross-dress. And he loved to go to at least Roy Cohn's, I guess the 1930s, 40s, 50s versions of like Diddy parties. That's what they would go to. But we also see in the 60s, and I love the 60s. The 60s are very turbulent, very fun. We have JFK die. Now again, whether or not it was through these three-letter agencies, we don't know. But we also have MLK. Much like a JFK figure, cheats on his wife a lot, plagiarizes some things, goes down in history as a hero. The greatest thing to happen to both these men is for them to be shot. I'm not saying that I want them to be shot, though. We also see Malcolm X. The violent aspect of the nonviolent civil rights movement. He gets taken care of. We have Fred Hampton. Who else do we have? Ooh, Bobby. BFK. The younger brother to JFK. He also gets off. We have all these political assassinations. We kind of look like Mexico in 2024, 2022, whenever their last election was, when they had 27 candidates get shot. But then we kind of realize, and by we I mean intelligence, we kind of realize we can't just keep killing whoever we don't want around anymore. Not saying that this is a change by Lyndon B. Johnson, because he's relatively a pawn who's controlled by oil or Texas. He's this Texas South. What we start to see, especially during this time, is these cowboys in the South who get at least oil money, some economic autonomy, economic freedom. What they start to do is then rival the New England banking. We kind of see this today with Texas kind of being this new Lone Star Republic state, where all of Silicon Valley is moving to them. And they're even entertaining the idea to create their own Texas stock market to rival the New York Stock Exchange. You know, it probably won't happen. But we get to at least Tricky Dick, Richard Nixon. I'm not a crook. He has Watergate, and I will speak up for him. Watergate isn't completely his fault. Watergate's a big scandal where he just wants to cover up the people breaking into the building. It's not his idea to break into the building. But it's through that accident that one document gets dropped by those idiots. And then we find out about MKUltra. And it becomes this whole big witch hunt, at least, for figuring out what was actually going down. Now, Richard Nixon, he resigns before he gets impeached. Quite frankly, really good president. Has great foreign policy. Opened the door to China. He's just not a good-looking guy. When he says he's not a crook, he almost bleeds crook blood. But I will argue that he's a pretty good president. Gerald R. Ford is relatively just a face. He's a representation of the FBI during the Church Committee when we were looking into JFK's assassination. He's relatively, I would argue, a pawn. He's one of these do-nothing presidents. Which leads us to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is hands down, at least beside or behind James Garfield, one of the greatest or nicest presidents we've ever had. I shouldn't say greatest. Jimmy Carter is a 4-term nerd. He's from Georgia. Again, really good humanitarian person, but that's not the role of the president anymore. The role of the president is to be ruthless. The role of the president is to essentially make tough decisions. And especially when you're headed with an oil or gas crisis, again, you guys, not you guys exactly, but you guys talk about gas prices, are they ever going to go down? Well, at this point in time, there's no gas to go around. Prices are literally like $12 a gallon. There's no gas. Mainly because the Saudis are going to then manipulate their oil. They're going to say, no oil to America, and because of that, our prices go up. But what's Jimmy Carter's response? He tells Americans to carpool. He tells Americans to wear an extra sweater. He tells Americans to do your fair share. If there's one thing we learn in this class, what is something that you don't tell an American to do?
Sure.
Anything. We hate being told what to do, because we are relatively grown adults, or at least grown adult children. Do not tell Americans what to do, or else they will not vote for you, which is exactly what happens. Again, even though he's trying to be a relative real person and talk to the public directly, hey dude, carpool, wear a sweater, do your part. Our response is, we're going to get rid of you. So we vote for Ronald Reagan. We go from Democrat to then Republican. Now, I personally don't like Reagan. I think that his aura as a character throughout history is very inflated. He does a lot of bad things. He's also the modern creator, relatively, of gun control. When he's governor of California, he's the individual who at least bans fully automatic firearms. But more importantly, he's going to ban open carry. Because the Black Panther Party, in a way to protect their people from the police, are going to start following the cops around with open firearms. Which, I'm not going to advocate for that, but it's solving a problem. But Ronald Reagan himself, and the reason why I want to talk about him quickly is we see a lot of comparisons from this administration to our administration right now. Ronald Reagan is this character of at least quote-unquote experience. He's an older individual, relatively 80 years old. But more importantly, we have Ronald Reagan as the head of this ticket. He's an actor from Hollywood, at least a governor. We can draw a lot of comparisons from him and Trump. Both characters who are relatively at the end of their game, 80 plus, but more importantly, they are the old guard, who is then going to set up the new guard. Anybody know who the vice president of Ronald Reagan is at this time? He's going to be the first guy we talk about tomorrow. This is going to be George H.W. Bush. The devil. He's ultimately the presidency that we're still living. George W. Bush is going to set our policy, especially on the foreign aspect, the global policy. He's going to set that standard for us. But he has a lot of comparisons. Who's our vice president right now?
Oh, what's the name? I remember.
Thank you, Holden. J.D. Vance. There are a lot of comparisons between these two administrations. It would seem, and again, the Republican Party right now doesn't have a character after Trump. We have Vance and we have Rubio. That's about it. Right now, the Democratic Party, we have Newsom, who seems to be the guy that they're going to win, or at least push for. Now, in this case, if history's going to rhyme, which it does, it never repeats, but it sounds or looks the same. If it rhymes, we could at least bet on a J.D. Vance attempt for 2028, mainly because of these two reasons. Leading up to George H.W. Bush's presidency, he is former Air Force. Although I'm not a big fan of him, his plane gets shot down in World War II and he survives in the Pacific. That's pretty badass. That's respect. But he is part of this idea of intelligence. On top of that, he's a secret society member at Skull and Bones Club, much like his son at Yale, where he goes. He also plays baseball at Yale, which, again, shout out, he's a baseball guy, but I don't like him. He's also going to be this representation of oil. He has this Zapata Oil Company that we don't know this at this point in time, but they're actually assisting CIA operations in Latin America, and then he actually gets given the job as director of CIA. But he is also going to be this marriage of military, oil, and Air Force is a slight background. That's more for intelligence. When we look at J.D. Vance, he at least has Army connections, but more importantly, he has a connection to our version of oil today, which is data. That company of Palantir the other day that I told you to invest in, guess who just got a $1 billion government contract? They did. Should have invested. You would have made money. You would have listened to me. But we have these new guards or new systems that are trying to almost get into the presidency. That's honestly what I would explain to this Palantir Anduril company. These data surveillance guys are trying to put their character at the top of the head, because then they can control the face. Riley, Sergio, the time is yours. What do you got for a question?
How did both sides put the